Okay, so welcome everyone out there and everyone in the audience to our second learning experience of the day, a daunting journey, homeless and disabled without a home. So part of our role at the Giving Spirit, a significant role that we play in our communities is in making homelessness relatable, making poverty relatable, and showing the lives and the stories of the folks that live on our streets, have resiliently overcome their situations to become thriving, wonderful members of our community, and who are truly the fabric of our city. So I want to first introduce our incredible moderator, Martel Akanji. Martel has been with us for now over a year and has done an exceptional job of bringing his professionalism and expertise, to our educational panel. He has over 15 years of experience working with communities, administrators, and legislators in the fields of education, juvenile justice, and public health. He focuses his intent on equity and justice to liberate and heal communities through program curriculum development and implementation. He has worked alongside legislators to bring awareness to issues that marginalize our most vulnerable communities: youth homelessness, juvenile justice, foster care, and education. He has led the implementation and development of the first permanent LGBTQ resource center at Cal State Northridge. He's driven change with Coca-Cola and the next generation of LGBTQ leaders and led a national queer people of color conference. He is currently working on his doctorate in leadership and change, focusing his dissertation on social identity and organizational culture. I now turn this panel over and the rest of the afternoon to Martel Akanji.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that so much, Tom. I get the greatest opportunity to sit on stage and get to really take an opportunity to learn and really invest my intention. And I ask everyone in the space today to really be intentional with how we engage with today. I think this is a discussion that we are least likely to have and almost stray away from. So I really want us to ground ourselves and really respect the space today as we get to have fun and enjoy ourselves, but really, most importantly, take away some amazing nuggets and conversations that we need to have much more of. So with that, I get to really introduce this amazing panel that's in front of me. And I'm gonna first start off with Pamela. Pamela was introduced into the human services field by way of lived experience. In December of 2017, 13 months after being housed in the Skid Row area, she started as a peer advocate. Her passion, expertise brought her to become an advocate and speak up, dedicating her voice and platform to engaging and changing the systems for the unhoused. Her professional career continued to move forward in the homeless services field while participating in the Triple H initiative to build permanent supportive housing for her community. Her experience navigating Skid Row ended in 2022 as her faith in God was a supportive system that led her to the light. Pamela is now a vocational case manager at the St. Joseph Center and a speak-up advocate for the Corporation of Supportive Housing. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Yes. What a wonderful intro.
Beautiful. Next up, we have Don. So I'm gonna do this fun thing where I'm gonna look really silly and be like, oh my gosh, Don, I'm gonna read this amazing bio that we have where it just reflected on me that I'm gonna read a different bio for us today. So, but Dawn has over 25 years of experience working in general and special education. She really emphasizes on an equity approach and really talking about the challenges of the learning disabilities and its unintended consequences on inclusion and general education. She has worked as a teacher, a professional, and an administrator, and has an extensive history of collaborating with districts and non-public schools throughout Southern California. Her expertises are classroom management, teacher preparation, and mentoring, and really wants to ensure that we understand how diversity of all types is an asset in any educational setting. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Awesome. And last but surely not least, we have the amazing Hal. Hal is an important voice who can share their experience with wisdom about the intersections of disability and housing insecurity. Although they are really moving forward with changing spaces, they are disabled in a wheelchair and with autism, formerly unhoused, and currently housing insecurity. They are a powerhouse to be reckoned with. Hal, thank you so much for being here with us today. So I'm excited to really have this panel here and to really engage us in a discussion that's going to be transformative. And I'm going to start off our first question with Hal. Please tell me, when you think about how you are navigating housing instability and really looking at housing stability, what are the things that are needed as you navigate through the conditions that are set forward in front of you?
Over this journey, I have looked at a dozen apartments in LA. 3 of them had elevators. The rest were on the first floor and still had steps. I have had to purchase a ramp very similar to that to get my chair in and out of my apartment as it stands right now. But as it stands, the grade is too steep, even with the ramp, for me to drive my chair up the ramp and into the house. I still have to get out of my chair at the bottom of the steps, work my way inside, and my husband has to push my chair up the ramp. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I do believe the ADA requires that at least 10% of all units be both affordable and accessible. I have not found that to be the case in LA. If they are affordable, they are not accessible. If they are accessible, they are not affordable. That is a problem. I live on SSI. I support my husband and I on one income that is, 75% below poverty level at the very least for one person, much less 2. My husband was not disabled prior to homelessness, but absolutely was by our experiences outside, which means he will never go back to work. He will never be able to work outside the home again. And that's going to be another financial hardship, not to mention the fact that I can't find an apartment that I can safely get in and out of.
I appreciate just the vulnerability that you shared. And most importantly, I think there's such a huge conversation that we need to discuss, right? I think as working even inside of some of the shelters or visiting some of those, accessibility is a conversation that never gets mentioned, right? So I think it's even when we even talk about these diversity, inclusion, and access, which I'm gonna say diversity, inclusion, and equity, because I think at times we miss that access point and what does accessibility really look like, right? So when we're talking about that work and how we want to incorporate that in the ways that we're serving folks, I think it's so important to include, like, what is accessibility? What does that actually look like?
Are you asking me?
Right.
What
If you want to answer it,
looks like? Okay.
Please.
In a broader sense, accessibility looks like inclusion for everyone, whether you are hearing impaired, visually impaired, or physically impaired. There should be a way for you to access whatever you need to access, period. If it's captions, if it's braille, if you can't read and you need pictures, whatever your disability may be, you should have access and easy access to the things that you need to make it easier for you to survive. For me personally, that means I need more ramps and elevators.
Thank you so much for that. You know, one of the things, especially as a learner, that I think is so important, and Pam, I'm gonna ask you the same question that I asked Hal as well too. And I also wanna ask you, when we talk about disability, right? That term right there, disability, what does that mean? Is that the term we should be using? How does that sit with folks? Please, if you can give us some of that insight in your own narrative, and then as well talk about, like, through that term, how has that also, created challenges or in your pathway navigating housing stability?
Well, first of all, it's like a stigma, right? And no, it's not the correct word. We just had a brief conversation prior to this conversation here. I was saying that I wasn't feeling well when I got here. And I said, just dealing with the disability. And I said, no, it's not. It's a condition. I have a condition. It's an affliction. But I'm able, very much able, to do a lot of different things. I just have my ups and downs, right? And I have to struggle with it sometimes. But I don't want it to be a label on me. You know, when you go to apply for a job or apply for housing or whatever it is that you need to take care of, you know, it gives people an opportunity to say, oh, wow, I don't want to deal with this person. Or, you know, they may not be educated enough to know or have the compassion to understand that this could be happening to anyone. Did I miss anything?
No, not in my heart. Thank you. Thank you for touching my heart and really being, ensuring that we hold accountability to that. I think there's a lot of ways that we always miss the mark, especially when we're trying to provide this sense of access. And also asking folks, I think we need to do better with asking folks like, what and how can I support you so we can move together in these processes? Compared to, here's what I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do, right? So Dawn, if you can, you know, thinking about this as well too, and as we talk about conditions, what are some of the key things you would like people to understand about conditions when we talk about physical health, when we talk about mental health and homelessness?
So the first thing is being open and normalizing the fact that people need supports. And so that's why I'm using notes today, because of my own disability and why I needed a reminder about the microphone. So one is that students, young people, and adults who are homeless and have disabilities are living at the intersection of two very stigmatized identities. And both of these wonderful people touched on that very eloquently. So spaces that would typically be safe for someone who is homeless might not be a safe or accessible place for someone who is homeless and disabled. A safe space or an accessible space to someone who is disabled might not be safe and accessible to someone who is also homeless. And when you add to those two identities, students who might also be LGBTQ or English learners, you know, in the school setting, the whole of those identities is so much greater than the sum of the parts, and the need to address them as a whole person, not just these individual boxes they might check. So that's one. And the second thing, and I just want to throw some statistics in here, if I may. Thank you. I love data. I'm sorry. I come from the university. I like data. So the second thing I want to mention is that kids who are homeless, foster, and/or highly mobile are far more likely to be diagnosed with a disability. So some numbers. Kids who are homeless or highly mobile are 4 times more likely to be diagnosed with a developmental disability than kids who are housed. They're twice as likely to be labeled with a learning disability, 3 times more likely to be labeled with emotional and behavioral problems, and drop out at higher rates than more stably housed peers. So just that intersection of the homelessness and disability, it just has such a tremendous effect.
Thank you so very much. You know, I think about my times navigating homelessness and the ways that I had to literally either climbing over fences, running, jumping over things, having to hide in cubby holes just for the night if it was raining, like thinking of those types of things, and me being so privileged to have a vantage point to even be able to have the ability to run and jump and to think about how I'm going to access spaces for my own survival. Hal, Pamela, please, and Dawn, feel free if this is also something you would like to answer too. Thinking of the ways that you had to navigate homelessness, thinking of the ways that, you know, we all have to navigate surviving through homelessness. What were some of those barriers that really stopped you from being able to access things, whether that was from your own mental, physical well-being? What did that look like?
I'll go first.
Thank you, Pam.
I remember being on Skid Row and going across the street, and I noticed a guy and a girl, and they were watching me. And I sensed something was wrong, and I crossed the street, and the guy snatched my chain. The guy snatched my chain. And I think that if I wasn't walking as slow as I was, I wouldn't have been a target, number one. Number two, I probably would have hurried up and got out of the way and went a different way, but I was in so much pain. You know, when you're in the shelters at that time, right? You're let out the shelter at 5:30, 6 in the morning, and you have to be outside all day. And I'm already walking with a limp, carrying this heavy limb, and I just imagine how, right? Like, I'm complaining about me, but I'm also concerned about people like Hal. Like, I could have stopped him. I could have physically probably threw him to the ground and did anything to him because he was a little thing, you know? But I mean, I would have had to come out of retirement to do that. Yeah, and I just, like, my reaction was just like, wow, they saw me walking slow and I was a target, you know? And it's just unfortunate that it's a lot of stuff going on. You can't run away from things when it's happening. I heard you talking about hopping over a fence. I remember one time walking down the street with a friend and somebody was shooting, and the best thing I could do was run into the bushes, like stumble and running, like just dodging bullets. So it's hard. It's impossible almost.
Thank you so very, very much. Hal, please.
My biggest issue while I was living outside was the fact that I was using a manual chair and the cops wanted to harass me every day over ADA access. I, at the time, was using a manual chair every single day. So, of course, my camp was accessible. Why are you going to use the housed ADA rights to trample on mine? I ain't in nobody's way. I can't. If my wheelchair at the time was wider than standard, so I had to have more than 36 inches of clearance. And there was always more than 36 inches of clearance in front of my camp because I needed to get my chair right up to the door of my tent so that I could fall into it onto my bed. My camp was always clean, but still, cops and sanitation every day wanted to bust my chops over a thing that they could see was unnecessary. As far as danger goes, my husband and I were always together. Like, we were attacked twice. But we were not the victims in said situation. The element of surprise worked in our favor. They did not think they had a challenge on their hands because I was in a chair. I can walk, I should not walk. I put it that way. So just because you might think I'm harmless doesn't mean I'm harmless. And that saved us. Like, it really did. We only got tried twice, and then word got around that we knew what the woodshed was and was not taking anything from anyone. I held more fear over the tent getting set on fire at night and not being able to get away quick enough.
Yes.
That was my biggest fear, because on my feet, I'm not very fast. I can walk, I should not, and I definitely can't run. If you see me running, you better run, because I don't run for nothing. Like that was always my biggest fear living outside, was not being able to get away from the tent fast enough if it got set on fire.
That is such a real fear. Realizing, I have this fear of being in a plane and like, oh my gosh, if something happens in the plane, but to note like, how does that extra layer of being somewhere where accessibility is that challenge, and we're noticing even in places where we feel like we're able to do so much more, there's some of us who can't, and we're relying on more support and more resource so we can all be able to do the things that we're asking to be done. Don, I kind of wanted to ask in your opinion as well too, and we've had some conversations in the back. We talk about our education system, and we talk about there's a huge percentage of young kids who are navigating homelessness with their families and are sitting inside of classrooms still trying to learn and receive an education. And then so you add in another layer of accessibility and what that looks like for young people as well too. And Don, being in those settings, can you tell us like, how does this impact people's education?
So, great question. And I'm going to have a little bit of a long answer to this one.
Please.
Because I do want to address it from my personal experience as well as from my professional experience. So, for me personally, as you've heard me say before, not everyone looks like their story. And my own experiences with disability and housing insecurity were that sometimes, it's a double-edged sword. So in a sense, it was good that people made assumptions that I couldn't possibly be housing insecure or didn't come off as disabled because I was doing well academically, because they didn't put me into one of those boxes and lower their expectation or assume I wouldn't be able to participate in things. So that was great. But the flip side was I wasn't getting the services and supports I needed. And we see that a lot even now with kids in schools where, again, they don't look like their story, so biases and assumptions come into play. From my professional experience, and again, I'm relying on my notes so I don't forget and don't go off task, kids who are homeless or housing insecure, highly mobile, switch districts a lot. And if they have a disability, they have very particular educational needs. And when I say educational, I mean both academic and social supports. And every time they switch schools, it takes time for their paperwork to catch up with them. So there's a learning gap every time they switch. And I've worked with kids, and y'all might have experienced yourselves, 6, 7 schools a year. And again, I'm going to the research. Students generally lose 3 months of reading and math learning every time they change schools. And that's a systemic issue, schools being on different curricula, different paces, whatever. Those things can be addressed at a systemic issue. That's a whole nother conversation on how we can fix that. I have thoughts. But so that's one issue, is those gaps in learning that other kids don't face, and teachers not being prepared for kids who are coming in mid-year and how to catch those kids up, how to address that. Yes, there are laws in place. The ADA was mentioned, education laws in place to address that. Those laws are not always followed. And in order to get those laws enforced and to hold folks accountable, parents, families have to have the resources to get advocates and lawyers, which how do you do that when you don't necessarily have access to a cell phone? It just adds multi-layers there. Frequent moves also mean a kid might not be in place long enough to be assessed for a disability, because that assessment process, about 90 days, right? They have to send out a plan for the parents to agree to assessment. That's 15 days. Then once the parents give permission, the school has 60 days to even complete the assessment and hold a meeting. Every time a child moves, they might start that process over again because nothing is built into the system to continue the process, which is a huge barrier. So just another quick statistic. The chances of homeless kids becoming eligible for special education services increases as they get older, which is the exact opposite of what happens for kids who are stably housed. Typically, if kids are stably housed, they get assessed earlier. So as the grades go up, fewer and fewer kids get identified as needing special services because they've already been assessed. For kids who are homeless or housing insecure, they'll often be late elementary school, middle school, even high school before they get properly assessed and get the services they need.
Well, first off, thank you for providing just information and data so we can tell a full story, right? We recognize that it's not just about like including just our narratives. We also want to include some of these numbers so folks can understand like this is large. This is a challenge that we're navigating within our communities. And I'll say we're navigating from a personal lens, but sometimes I feel like our systems are not even acknowledging, right? So how do we, when we think about getting folks involved, to really start to say, we need to pay attention to what's happening in our communities, right? What are the things that, and Hal, I'd love to start with you in this sense. What do we need to tell folks? What do they need to pay attention to when we have this conversation?
Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, and if you insist on asking the questions, accept the answers that you get.
Yes.
If you're asking questions of marginalized communities, take their word as law. They are the only experts on their conditions.
Pamela, would you like to add to that?
Yes,
Please.
I would. Imagine experiencing housing insecurity. Just waking up in the morning, if you even slept, right? And you need to take care of your basic needs. When you get up, what does everyone have to do?
Bathroom.
And is there a bathroom on the street?
No.
Okay, and then how do you go about doing this safely if you have a physical condition?
You don't?
Come on, Hal. And then you're a woman, too. Okay, a man can stand up and take care of his business really quick anywhere, real fast, but is it a comfortable situation? No. Imagine Hal trying to do it. Imagine me trying to do it, and I'm walking around and I'm dragging this leg, and I have to look in every direction, find somewhere safe, and then pull everything down to take care of that and then properly clean myself. Do I have time to jump through all these hoops to make sure, and I don't even know where I'm going to be from one day to the next if I have children and I'm on the street. Thank God I didn't experience it with my children. You know, because I'm moving from place to place. And she said 15 days, Dawn. Like, really, I understand that the protocol is to help the parent and the child, right? But when my most important tasks are just taking care of my basic needs, and I only talked about the first function that every human being has upon awakening, and then there's more to it, and that's enough.
You know, you speak of something to where it even helps us to talk about criminalizing homelessness, right? Where we're understanding we're creating legislations and policies, ordinances within our communities to say, if someone is doing this, we're not even gonna ask them why. Give them the ticket. They got a ticket now. They can't pay that ticket. Now we're talking about the next step. So what does it look like to have something on your record by getting you locked up? Now we're talking about that you're locked up. It's this whole cycle of criminalization that then happens based on your identities, based on your abilities, based on all the things that when we talk about homelessness and the conditions that we exist in, this is our outcome, right?
I have something I'd like to say to that end. The housing system, or lack thereof, in LA is not designed to help anyone. It is designed to frustrate us into becoming either someone else's problem or to drive us to insanity, prison, or drug rehab. So that we are someone else's problem and then our suffering can still be profited from. There has been so much money poured into the homelessness industrial complex in LA that should have been better spent on directly housing people these interim problems, interim problems, that's just what they are problems, they are not solutions, are killing people.
Thank you so much, Don. I know it seems like you had something to say, so if you want to wrap us up in this concept, and we'll open it up for Q&A.
Tying into what was just said, the same thing very much holds for the education system in many places. There are some places doing great things, many are not. And there are so many changes that can be made to the system to make things more accessible for folks with disabilities, families who are housing insecure. And so much money right now is being put into programs for diversity and equity. Every school district in the country, let alone California, has programs having to deal with diversity and equity. And I'm saying that if you're doing diversity and equity and not including disability in that, you are not doing diversity and equity.
Beautiful, beautiful points. And I just want to give it up for all of our panelists here today. Phenomenal narratives, phenomenal approaches. I do want to open it up for Q&A and see if there's any folks in the audience that have any questions for us today.
This is a question for Hal. I just wanted to hear you expand on what you call the interim problems that are killing people.
I referred to any sort of carceral interim housing, such as Project Roomkey, Path of Bridge Home, anything like that that is basically jail light. Those are problems. Those are not solutions. You cannot treat grown adults like children or mental patients in what is supposed to be the stepping stone to housing. I want to say Project Roomkey saw 30, I don't know the numbers, but only something like 30% got housed. And there were thousands of bodies through those doors. And I can speak to direct experience from this. I was in Hotel Solaire for several months. Pat downs every time you walk in and out. If you miss curfew, you are out. 7 p.m. You have to be inside by 7 p.m. My personal experience with Hotel Solaire staff and Project Roomkey staff was that they intentionally triggered my PTSD and autism meltdowns every day as an excuse to evict me from the program. I made every attempt to warn them of my particular conditions and my triggers and how to avoid setting those things in motion. And they went out of their way to make it happen every single day. They took my ADA rights and treated them as privileges to be revoked. Path of Bridge Home, when I was in Path for 9 months, they put me in the furthest bunks from the bathroom. I had a good 50 meters between my bunk and the only accessible bathroom stall on the property. And again, staff there treated my ADA rights like privileges to be revoked. Anything that is not direct house keys is a problem. Yep. It is not a solution. Yep. It is a way to line somebody else's pockets while letting people suffer and die on the streets.
Thank you, Hal, so much for that answer as well, too. I know we had one more question in the audience.
Thank you. The panel and just you sharing your stories is so incredibly helpful and educational. So thank you. So I have a question that touches on education, the K-12 system, and communities as well. So California the governor just announced, a $4 billion investment in community schools, which have a track record of success in other communities, but Los Angeles is really unique. And I'm genuinely curious, I want to be hopeful, do you think that community schools are part of a reasonable solution for some of the challenges that we experience here? Or is that $4 billion that could be spent differently?
I have a lot of different answers to that, some of which would probably get me fired since this is being recorded. So I'm going to kind of censor myself. I think I would start, if you're going to have that conversation out in the community, make sure everyone is on the same page with their definition of what a community school is. Because there are so many different perceptions and definitions that when you get folks together to work on it, you want to make sure they are all working on the same construct. So another thing I would say is, yes, the research shows community schools can be very effective, but I believe that research was done in places that tend to be smaller with less bureaucracy, if I'm correct.
That's what's in the back of my head too.
So when there are multiple layers of bureaucracy, what's being called a community school, the people who are actually in charge are not part of the community. And it goes back to the quote from The Princess Bride. I don't think that word means what you think it means. So I think that's the biggest part of it. I think it's a great idea, but the people leading the community effort have to be the community and not outside agencies who have a track record of being successful before someplace else.
Okay, I'm going to bring Tom up here.
First, I just want to thank the panel and thank all of you for sharing your stories and being vulnerable to the audience, but also bringing reality to all of us. And for those of you who are still, in the margins, still trying to stay resilient in this fight, we're here for you, as you are here for us today. So I think I expressed that from all of us in the audience. So thank you again.
Thank you all so much for allowing us to bear witness to your journeys, and I'm so glad to have shared space with y'all in this discussion today. Once again, have a beautiful day, and thank you all for showing up. Be well.